Okay, so now we're going to do a few more practice questions, but notice the directions for this one are different than before. Before they said rational zeros, and now we want real zeros. Our theorem only gives us possible rational answers, but we might need to use the quadratic formula or some factoring or completing the square to find the other zeros in the end, and they might not be rational. And you'll see that with this first one. So I'm going to list all of my p's. And for q, plus or minus 1 or 3. So I'm going to choose to start with -1. And let's see if that divides evenly. And if we get a remainder of 0. And we do. Yay. So my first 0 is x equals -1. So now I'm left with 3x to the third minus 2x squared minus 6x plus 4 equals 0. Because we started out with a degree of 4, this next equation is just one less at a degree of 3. And I'm going to factor with grouping. So the greatest common factor of this first piece is just x squared. And the greatest common factor of this back piece is -2. So now I've got x squared minus 2 times 3x minus 2 equals 0. So then x squared minus 2 equals 0. 3x minus 2 equals 0. I'm going to solve them up here. This one's quick and easy to start. X is 2/3. So now, so far, I have two rational answers. 2/3, it can be written as a fraction, and -1, that's another rational number. But when we solve the x squared minus 2, and I square root both sides, I get x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 2. The square root of 2 is a irrational number, but it is real. And because the question asks for real zeros, these two, the positive root 2 and the negative root 2, are two more of my answers. So we're going to try 4 more just like this. I want you to pause the video here and try these 4 questions, and then we will unpause it and you'll be able to check all of your work against mine to make sure you get the right answers. Okay, for number 5, my answers are x equals -3 and x equals plus or minus the square root of 5. I started by synthetically dividing with -3 once I listed out all of my p's and q's. Hopefully, again, it didn't take you too much trial and error to get to the first one. And then I'm left with x squared minus 5 equals 0. So to solve this, I'm going to move the 5 to the other side. And when I square root both sides, I get my plus or minus root 5. For number 6, my answers are x equals 2, x equals -1/2, and x equals plus or minus root 6. So all of my choices for p are plus or minus 1, 2, 3, and 6. And q, the only choice is positive or -1. I'm going to start by dividing with 2. Hopefully this fraction of -3/2 didn't throw you off. Nothing wrong with fractions. And again, I get a remainder of 0. So that's how I got my first answer of x equals 2. So now I need to rewrite as an x to the third And this one, again, I'm going to use grouping. I'm actually going to turn the page so I have more space to solve that. Oh, 2 pages. Okay, so 6 continued. I was at x to the third plus 1/2 x squared. Okay, so I'm going to factor by grouping again. I'm going to factor out an x squared from the first. And because I want what's left to match this, I'm going to factor out a -6. So that way I'm left with the same thing, so I can regroup that x squared minus 6, x plus 1/2. So x squared minus 6 equals 0, x plus 1/2 equals 0. So x is -1/2. And here x squared equals 6, so x is plus or minus root 6, because I took the square root of both sides. My answers for 7 are x equals 1 and x equals 2 plus root 3 and 2 minus root 3. So for 7, I started with 1 for my synthetic division. So that's how I got my x equals 1 as my first answer. And then I'm left with x squared minus 4x plus 1 equals 0. And this doesn't factor. So I'm going to split the middle. Complete the square, because this is even. So I moved my 1 over. Half of 4 squared is 4. So this factors to x minus 2 squared equals 3. Can square root both sides. So I've got x minus 2 equals plus or minus root 3, and add the 2 over, and that's how I got my last 2 answers. Okay, last but not least, number 8. I get x is -1, and x is 1 plus or minus root 2. So I started with -1 for my synthetic division. I get my remainder of 0. So here's how my -1 is my first rational 0. Then I'm left with x squared minus 2x minus 1 equals 0. This does not factor, so I'm going to complete the square again. Half of -2 squared is 1. So I have x minus 1 squared equals 2. Square root both sides. So x minus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 2. So my last 2 zeros, x equals 1 plus or minus the square root of 2. So now that we've done some practice together, your homework is 6.6b, 1 through 15. Here are the answers, so that as you work the remainder of class on these 15 questions, on 1 through 15, you can check yourself as you go. Be prepared tomorrow with any questions, and this flip chart and the video will be on Edline, so if you want to look at it again tonight, you can do that.